Ignacio, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Ignacio, you're one of the 1 million years of joy leadership luminaries for 2024. You're also a professor and an author specializing in leadership and transformation. What led you to this career path, and what is the most fulfilling part for you when it comes to helping students navigate complex professional challenges?
Well, actually, I ended up becoming a leadership professor and consultant after many changes, professional changes. I first, well, I'm from Spain, even though I live in Chile, and I was born and raised in Spain, but I went to a German school there. And after I finished school, I decided to study engineering, telecom engineering, and I went to Germany, spent 5 years there studying. And when I came back to Spain, I worked for telecom companies selling big mobile networks and stuff like that. And I was very away from leadership. That was something that wasn't in my mind at all, as a concept of even teaching. We worked there for 10 years or so, and it was actually rather successful. We sold a big network, and it was like a huge success, and everybody was so happy about it. But somehow it wasn't like fulfilling for me. It was like there was something missing. Selling networks, it wasn't something that I really wanted to do in my life. I was looking out for some purpose, and I decided to quit. Yeah, right there at the peak, I said, well, I won't do this anymore. It won't get better than today. So I decided to quit, and I went to the social sector. I began to work in a foundation, working to promote sustainable development in South America. And that was a big failure. So after my big success, this great failure where nothing worked, and we were all fired and they closed down, and it was a terrible situation. And I divorced at the time as well. So I really didn't know what to do with my life. And I decided, well, I have to go to the public sector. I've been in the private sector, in the social sector. Now I go to the public sector, and I try to mix up technology and sustainable development. So I went to the Harvard Kennedy School looking for some answers there. And there I was forced to take a leadership course. I always hated leadership all my life. I always had a bad reaction with leadership because, as I told you, I was in a German school. So leader in German, the word for leader in German is Führer. And since I was a kid, I was kind of like, you have to be very aware of that and don't make those mistakes again. It was always criticizing authority and leadership. And so I had this bad relation with the concept of leadership. And I took a class there, forced, as I said, and it was like an epiphany. It was like a totally different perspective on leadership from Professor Heifetz. And it was like an experience for me that made me understand the world in a different way, understand myself differently, understand why I had been so successful sometimes and how I failed so miserable other times. And somehow it was a way of looking at the world and everything that was so different that I said, well, this is what I want to do. So I started as a consultant, and then I moved over to teaching because there were, apples don't fall far away from the trees, and all my parent, my uncle, my other uncle, my aunt, my cousin, they are all teachers. I ended up in something that I never thought I would, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying what I do now, and I'm happy that I stepped into that class without actually wanting to do that. But here I am after 20 years.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. And before we dive into your leadership insights that have emerged over the years, the books you have written, I was wondering if we can maybe talk a little bit about the insights that have emerged as a result of you living in various countries. What have you learned about the cultural dimension that relates to how we experience joy across different cultures?
Well, I've lived in 6 countries meanwhile, yeah, and it has been for me a source of joy for myself, yeah, in the sense that getting to know and understand different people, different perspectives, different worldviews, and how people, actually spend their life, what they do, what they share, what they value. It's something that's that I always love. So the fact that I've been, changing the countries and so on, it was so enriching all the time for me. So getting to know different people with different perspectives, also not only different countries, but having worked, in the telecom sector, in the social sector, now teaching, and getting to see all the diversity of perspectives on the world and on life is really enriching, and that's a source of joy, I would say, in general. And then you realize that in the different countries, people, the different cultures, they value different things. And that also very enriching. On the other side, there's sometimes you say, well, I don't really agree with those values, or I would prefer those or that. But at the end, when people ask me, and they ask me quite a lot of times, which is the country you prefer, I say, well, all of them and none. All of them, they have something very special, something that I love. And all of them have some dark sides where you say, well, with this part of it, I wouldn't agree. But culture is it's critical. It's a way of people to align and to fulfill themselves in a particular way. And all those particular ways are enriching, and none of them is perfect. That's what I
And
would
again,
say.
it's really about how you look at different things. And I was interviewing a guest who was living in one of the Nordic countries, but he was originally from the UK. And he was sharing that before he left the UK, and of course, as he was interacting with different people, asking them how they were doing, the automatic response from individuals in the UK was, I'm very busy, working on so many projects and so on. And
Sure.
then when you ask exactly the same question in any one of the key Nordic countries, what he realizes is many, many people were basically talking more about their hobbies. Oh, I had a great weekend. I went kayaking, or I learned how to knit, or I was with the kids. And he was really, really shocked. And now he lives in one of the Nordic countries. He was sharing how, as given his citizenship as a British citizen, seeing these differences were very, very enlightening. And actually, it even opened the door for him to even experiment with more things, more hobbies, and more fun things that he never even thought of doing. And he really emphasized these key cultural differences. And I was wondering if you could potentially highlight
Yeah.
what has surprised you the most from these distinct key differences that have emerged from one culture to the next? And as I said, it's
Yeah.
it's all a matter of perspective, right? It's not,
Yeah.
good or
Absolutely.
bad, perfect or imperfect, right? But I'd love to hear one example of something that really clashed maybe with your worldview or the values that you hold very dearly.
One thing that shocked me both in the States and in Chile, actually, it's a relation with security and fear. When you go to the States, everybody say, take care, take care. When people say goodbye, say, take care. It's like, there's danger out there. And for me, it was shocking. It was kind of like, being take care. And I was always, and I intentionally always say, well, you enjoy. Actually, that's what I said back in return. And people look at me like, why is he saying that? Because there was this different values. And when I came here to Chile, somehow I found the same thing, that, security and be careful and so on. It was like very, very important to people. But previously to coming to Chile, I worked in Colombia for 2 years, and I actually did some internships also in Brazil, in the favelas, and very, so to say, dangerous places, actually. But nobody had that same attitude. I came to a favela in Brazil, and everybody was like joyful, and everything is fine. I say, well, there's people running around with machine guns, and they say, oh, no problem, they know who we are, everything's fine, everything's fine. Yeah. So dangerous places, people were just enjoying. You came to much more secure places, and everybody is afraid. And that contrast, it's like, has been always shocking to me, and I always try to avoid to get into those fearing attitudes, because I think that is one of the main constraints for joy. If you're always afraid, if you always fear that something's bad coming, you will separate yourself from others. You won't, open up. You won't be curious. You will close down, and there's no way you can actually enjoy life if you just take that attitude. So yeah, that's something that shocked me both in the States and Chile, and something I try to avoid as much as possible.
What are the joys from living in Chile? What brings you the most joy today?
Well, the most joy today for me here in Chile is it's my family and my work. I met my wife here in Chile, and my daughter was born here in Chile, so that's my first source of joy. The Universidad Adolfo Ibañez, where I work, the possibility of teaching what I teach in the way that I teach as a business school is not so often, because as I said, it's a very different model, so to say, not the typical one that you would teach in a business school. So having those two opportunities, fulfillment and family, fulfillment at work, that Chile has given me that. And then, extended family from my wife, and also the nature here. Nature here is amazing, and the opportunity to travel, especially to the south of Chile, and see the magnificent natural wonders and connect with that. that's something very, very special that you can enjoy here, actually.
So for our listeners that may actually be curious to explore Chile as one
Yes.
upcoming future tourist destination, what would you recommend, and what has brought you the most awe, particularly as you were describing some of the key places that are
Yeah.
really magnificent?
But one of the things that's impressive, and you don't really notice that when you look at the map, because the projection that we have in the maps is much more taken from the north. So the south, it's kind of like strung together. But you come down here to the south and to Chile particularly, and northern Chile, it's, if you can imagine, that's like somehow southern Morocco,
Hmm.
and southern Chile is up to the North Pole. So it goes from the Sahara up to the North Pole. That's that's 5,000 kilometers, I think, 5,500 kilometers long. So you have everything. You have from the biggest deserts, the most driest desert in the north, to the glaciers and the Antarctica in the south, and everything in between. So it's a country that offers you all the different, ecosystems and climates and so on. Yeah. So if you want to go into the north, San Pedro Atacama, it's amazing. It's a desert, the driest desert in the world. And then you go to the south, and there's a sea of glaciers that you cannot just, there's no road. You have to fly over them because it's just, I don't know how many 100 kilometers. So you have to fly over them. And then you have very particular places, particularly Torres del Paine. It's incredible. And I would recommend anybody to go and visit that. Yeah, absolutely. If I have to pick one place, but there's so
Okay.
much to see and so diverse that it's worth making a trip down here.
Amazing, amazing. Haven't had the pleasure yet to visit Chile, but now you've certainly given me the desire to do so. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
So, Ignacio, if we now focus a little bit on your professional arena, and as I'm thinking about the shifting and volatile environments that we're living in, what leadership qualities do you believe are essential for executives and CEO to be able to navigate effectively in these fast changing environments?
One quote I always loved is one by H.L. Mencken, what is a journalist from 20th century journalist from the States, and he always said that for every complex problem, there's always a solution that's simple, neat, and wrong. And I think that is one of the key mistakes I'm observing today, both my students and my clients as a consultant, is that, and also in the communities and the society in general, we're looking for simple answers to complex problems. And that is in principle wrong. If you have a systemic problem with complex interactions and causalities, and you just are looking for a simple and neat solution to apply, you will probably fail. And then you will need to start again. So I would say one of the big capacities that we need today is the capacity to do good diagnosis. And that requires to observe and interpret what's going on around you and accept the complexity and diversity of perspectives that are kind of involved in whatever challenge you're trying to tackle. What I perceive is rather the opposite. People go to the solution very fast. They want to apply the solution as fast as possible. I always say we're trained as our educational system. It's kind of like promoting us to become managers, not leaders. And the difference to me is that management is like efficiently solving known problems. Yeah, this is something we know how to do, how to fix. Just go and do it and be optimal, in resources, time, and whatever it is. So just be efficient in solving. That's management. Leadership to me, it's promoting change. Yeah, it's going out into uncertainty and try to promote progress, some learning that helps the group progress under new circumstances. So it's a huge difference between management, the present, the known, and leadership, which is learning into the unknown, and the uncertainty. And I would say we are trained as managers. If you think about the educational system, we go to school and they give us like a lot of recipes to solve known problems. So if you find this problem, you apply this solution. If you're fast enough, I give you a good grade, So efficiency, in the answer. And we are trained to do that for, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. Depends how much time we spend at school and the university. But then we find a problem, and that's what we want to do. We want to apply a fast solution and get to a simple answer. And that's exactly the opposite as from what we should be doing. Try to really understand the new situation, try to understand the complexity that's around you, try to understand the legitimate diversity of perspectives on the issue. And then once you have a good interpretation, then you have to be creative in order to actually find a new solutions for that, And instead of doing that, we try always to go back to, I know how to fix that. Yeah, just, count on me. And I see now in society people asking for those fast solutions because of the uncertain times we're living in. And there's a lot of people coming up and say, yeah, just, vote for me. I have the answer. I know how to fix this. It will be fixed in 2 days. Just leave it up to me. And we people we want to believe that. But that at the end as I said, is a wrong solution. So I would say we need to open up to understand the complexity, make good diagnosis from the empathy and the acceptance of legitimate perspectives, and then be creative to find solutions. And that doesn't mean we have to be like fall into paralysis by analysis. That's not what I'm saying, but I remember when I was studying in Germany, I had this good friend of mine, Mamadou Keita. He was from Mali. And every time we had to, solve a problem, whatever it was, engineering problem, I always look at the problem. I saw the problem. I started to solve it as fast as I could. And he always had like a tea, and he read like the problem like 10 times, and I was like, come on, Madu, just go ahead. Come on, man, we have to finish this, and then suddenly I came to a point where I couldn't go any further. There was something missing or a problem or whatever, And Madhu looked at me and said, hey, bien, there's this problem here, and you haven't seen this and this and that. And he was, he started to write, and he was finished before me always. He always started later, but he always finished earlier. And I try to learn from him that sometimes when there's new situations, new problems, you have to take your time, really understand, and then you will be effective. Otherwise, you will probably find a wrong solution.
It's so interesting what you have just shared. And as you were sharing the specific details on what, in your view and your experience, would be the optimal way forward, what was coming to my mind was the fact that as leaders or as human beings, we may have blind spots. So we may have unconscious biases. How can we overcome those realities and integrate them in an effective way as part of the stepping back, the analysis stage, and so on? What recommendations would you have for some leaders that may want to jump too fast in the pool?
Well, I would say first the first thing I would say is we need to accept that we are imperfect, and that we fail and that we make mistakes and that we have biases. We don't see the reality. We just have our own perspective on it, which is limited. So we need to be more humble. And the biggest problem today is that most of the people that have very high positions of authority in different organizations, they are there because they have been very successful. And it's very difficult to be humble when you are successful. So once you're in those positions and people are looking up at you and looking for those answers, and you have the experience and knowledge, it's very difficult that you don't go up and say, okay, let's go and do it. Because everybody is expecting that from you and you feel like you can provide that. It's a vicious circle, so to say, So to be able to stop that requires humility and self-consciousness and being aware that you just see a part of the whole business. You need to integrate other perspective. You need to accept that you have an opinion, but not the truth, and make up the best out of those different perspectives and your legitimate opinions and try to integrate them in a perspective that gives you new ways of trying to solve the problem. But it's very difficult because it goes against the grain of the organization who wants to provide solutions, and it goes against your own identity, who is I'm the solutions provider. So it requires to stop and say, okay, I have to accept this and see how we manage that in a different way. It requires introspection. I think it requires failure, I would say, because the only way to be humble is after you fail. If you fail badly, then you accept that you're not as perfect as you thought you would be. And there comes the introspection, and then comes the opportunity to open up to others and listen more, So I think failure could be one of the big sources to settle this in movement. And probably in the times we're living today, most people will fail badly. Will fail badly. So maybe there's a chance to relook at oneself in the world and try to do things in a different way.
Indeed. And when we talk about failure, I mean, there's so much to learn, right? And hopefully, as long as we don't let that failure define our identity and who we are, and we look at it rather as an opportunity to evolve as a human being, evolve in our sphere, whatever domain we may be operating in.
And I can tell you something about that because, as I told you, I had this big success back in the telecom industry, and then I had this big failure,
Yes.
and I was feeling incompetent, absolutely incompetent. I couldn't understand if I was so successful previously that I did my MBA, now I had more knowledge. I was supposed to be successful again, and I failed miserably, as I said. And to me, it was first this feeling of incompetence, and then a feeling of guilt. Like if I couldn't manage this, there's something that I had been irresponsible or something I should done wrong. So I had this very bad feelings about myself, And thankfully, when I went to the Kennedy School, I found this in a surrounding where I saw a lot of professors, some of those genius, they're saying, I don't know, maybe it depends. So it was like those people that I admired somehow were open to not knowing and not, failing. And I saw them in their attitudes and opinion, and something that was so relieving. It was like, oh, if they don't know, why should I know? And that opened up a different perspective. Instead of guilt, a co-responsibility in whatever happened, and at work or in my marriage, but not the feeling of guilt, and an openness to accept that there's a lot of things that we know, and we should try to do that as good as possible. And there's a lot of things that we don't know. And if we don't know, then the only thing you can expect is to fail and learn from it fast and, try it again and just do it better, and that change in perspective, it relieved me so much that I think it's important, because otherwise, as you say, failure is something that you blame yourself and you don't want to try again, and so on and so on. So we need that surrounding where failing is just acceptable, because we are an uncertainty, and an uncertainty is just a regular thing to do. It's part of the
Yes.
game. Anyway,
Yes.
sorry.
Oh no, no need to be sorry. All's good. I had another conversation with a guest. We published the episode not too long ago. He's actually a professor at some of the leading universities in the US, from Harvard to MIT and so on. And he was sharing that the students that are within those universities have only had successes, because it was like literally the requirement for them to have the top marks, the top grades, like across the board, in order even to get into those top schools. And what he realized is that those young future leaders were actually struggling with this whole notion of failure. And what he was trying to instill in them is that it's not necessarily all about failure. It's really about, let's call it iteration, right? That we failed, but it's getting us closer to making progress towards a redirected path that could potentially lead to better outcomes. And I was curious to get your views as to whether you're seeing the same trend in Chile across the young students that you teach.
Yeah.
Is that the same reality, or you're seeing a completely different perspective from these young students?
No, I see something similar, and I would agree with the professor you mentioned in general. And I think that is something that has to do probably with the fear I was mentioning before. In general, not I mentioned US and Chile, but in general in the world, I perceive everybody is more cautious and everybody's more afraid of bad things that could happen. So we try to keep our children like more protected. In general, all over the world, I see things that I did when I was a young kid. I remember my mom telling me at 10 o'clock in the night, just go down and find your brother. He's got to be somewhere. And I was living in Madrid, and there was cars everywhere, and he's gone away for 6 hours, and it was dark, and nobody knew where he was. And I had to go down with 10 years and try to find him somewhere. And that is something impossible today in any country, developed countries. And the possibility of the kids to go out and experience and fail and do it on their own, and find a way back home if they get lost or stuff like that. As parents, we are refraining that more and more. Everything is kind of like more controlled and planned, and you bring them to sports, and there's a coach, and everything is kind of like settled by grown-ups and authorities to avoid those risks. Okay, so I'm not denying the fact that there is risk, but there's a consequence if we overprotect, and then once life kicks in and then you fail, because you will fail, you're just not used to. And the first failure you have in your life, if you are like 15, 20 years old, then it's huge. If you're kind of used to small failures all your life, then, you take it for natural as part of it. And you have to be resilient and keep on trying. But if you've been kind of overprotected, then the first time it kicks in, then you don't have the tools to deal with that. And then it generates a problem. So I would say it's a general problem in developed countries all over the world. And it has to do very much with the way we are raising as parents and how afraid we are of our kids going into dangers. And again, I accept there's dangers, but I think we sometimes overreact as parents. And that is something in the long term, it's worse actually than just accepting that there will be frustration, problems and mistakes and, and bad things that you have to overcome. Anyway.
Yes, fully agree with what you're saying. And whether these realities and challenges emerge in our personal lives, there's also many realities and challenges that emerge within organizations, particularly those that are looking into transforming and driving change for whatever reason. And when I look at specific studies and challenges that often certain leaders experience, there is this reality that some organizations are so focused on the financial KPIs that they often forget the human side of any sort of transformation. And that leads often to burnouts, disengagement, low productivity, low creativity, which is actually counterintuitive from the original desires that a leader may have when he or she initiates a transformation. What advice would you give leaders in order to navigate with more ease and with more joy and more purpose significant organizational transformation and never forget about the human dimension in the process?
Yeah. What it has to do, I think my answer is related to what we talked before about this efficiency, this management setting that we are trained and educated to get into. If you focus on efficiency, try to solve complex problems in a straightforward way. And if you try to do that, then you leave the human factor out of the equation. So this need to have everything under control, to have this feeling that we are implementing the right solution in the right way, and so on, pushes you to focus on the execution rather than on the diagnosis. And then you leave out the human factor. And every time that you have a new problem, humans are critical because, we as people, we react to challenges very differently, depending on the impact we perceive of that challenge. So it gets complex and people are a problem every time you try to promote some change. But on the other side, solutions to new challenges do come out from people. So people is the problem, but it's also the solution. So you have to put them into the equation. Otherwise, there won't be any success. If you fail to consider that human factor, everything is like you get together with people that think alike. This is great. Let's do it. Let's manage that and give it to somebody to implement, But you're just talking to people that think like you, that see the same perspective. You all agree, but there's just a part of the system. There's other people that will be impacted that you're not considering. And once those people see the impact they receive, they may resist or they may, boycott you or they may do whatever, And then once you see this happening is why is this happening? Because you didn't consider it from the start. You should have considered it from the start. So every time we do that, the risk of failing is very high. For example, consider mergers and acquisitions. That's kind of like the typical fields. Up to 80%, the studies say that up to 80%, 85% of mergers and acquisitions don't fulfill the expectations. So why? And I remember once I went to the London School of Economics and I was talking to a professor there who was a specialist in mergers and acquisition. And so he was talking about, the due diligence and the evaluation and the legal part and everything and the KPIs and all financial indicators. And it was a great class, by the way. But at the end, I went up and I asked him, when do you consider a cultural factor here in your equation? When do you bring it in? And he said, no, that's a problem of implementation, he told me. And I said, how can you consider the human factor at the end of your analysis once you have settled down the whole strategy? And one of the critical factors, which is people in a merger and acquisition, has not been considered up to the end where you implement the solution. And then you are surprised that 85% of them fail. I mean, it's surprising that 15% do not fail, you see. So I'm not denying the importance of a good due diligence and the KPIs and all the hard stuff that you need to do, but you have to consider the other part as well, because it's just critical in every human setting. And particularly today, where we're just looking for talent and not human resources that just do whatever you want them to do. If you're looking for talent it's by definition people that have their own, perspectives, opinion, knowledge, and people that are empowered. And those guys won't shut up and do whatever you tell them to do. They will, they will speak up. And the more talent you have in an organization, the more critical it gets to consider those factors into if you really want to, manage to get the KPIs you are planning. Otherwise, the risk of failure will be very high, in my opinion.
Yes, indeed. Very well said. Thank you for sharing that. And Ignacio, I know that you're about to publish two books on authority and leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what motivated you to write about these topics?
Well, yes, I'm working, and I've been working on that a couple of years now. I'm almost there with the publishing. Actually, it was supposed to be one book, but now it's got too big, so it's got to be split it up, and it's got to be two. So I hope to be publishing sometime at the end of this year, or maybe at the start of next year, the second one. What motivated me? First, personally, I always had been struggling with this concept of authority and leadership, as I told you, because of my uprising in the German school and authorities and relations to authorities, and how bad we need authorities, and how we seek them to solve our problems. And on the other side, how much rejection we have, and I personally had, against authorities. So it was like this mixed feeling and contradiction. So I always had that in me. And I realized my students had that as well. And it was something that's what's very important for them. And then I realized that there was three big challenges that most of my students had. The first one is how to validate themselves. Many people go into a new organization or a new position, and they don't know how to get enough validation by, their peers, their reports, and their bosses. The second big challenge they had is how to, establish good bonding with others inside their team, with other areas, like even with the market, with the clients, or, so there was this struggle always to have good, fruitful, collaborative, synergistic relations. Yeah, was the second thing. And the third challenge was to promote change. Every time they had tried to promote change, they failed and had a lot of problems, and there was a lot of politics going around and a lot of fighting back and forth, and different interests, agendas. And the model, the leadership model, the adaptive leadership model, makes a great distinction between management and leadership, as I said, but also between authority. Authority is just a role you play in the system. Authority is just maybe formal, informal, but it's the position you hold in the system. And then you exercise leadership or you manage, depending. Those are activities. So it's a great model because it splits up those three concepts, which usually are mixed together. So you have the role as the authority figure, formal or informal, and then you have two activities, management and leadership. And by understanding authority as the result of an authorization, you begin to see things very, very differently. And that really shocked me when I was in class with Professor Heifetz. He said, authority is the result of a process of authorization. So you are authorized by others to hold power. And that's not only in democracies or things like that. I mean, the CEO of a company, it's being authorized by the board of directors. The board of directors authorizes that person to hold a certain power, and they're expecting that person to fulfill their expectations. So authority is not something giving or static that you have and you just exercise. Authority is a result of a process, a continuous process of authorization by others. So if you see authority in that way, then you suddenly realize, why am I having troubles to validate myself? Because you are continuously being evaluated if you are worth being authorized or not. Are you fulfilling my expectations? Okay, then I give you power. You don't fulfill my expectations, I take off the power. Why do we have problems to bond with others? Because we're not fulfilling those expectations. This continuous network of mutual authorizations that sustain our social living as humans, we just don't see that. And as we don't see it because we think authority is something static, is a title, something like that. Instead of this dynamic process, continuous real-time process, we cannot handle that process. And then suddenly people are invalidating me. Why? I'm doing things right. Yeah, but from your perspective, but the people are authorizing you don't think that your perspective is the one that's fulfilling their expectations, you see? So this perspective of authority helped me in two ways. One's to my own struggles with authority and counterdependence on authority very often. And on the other side, to understand why those challenges are so frequent. And to me, the source is that we don't see something that's at the basis of human relations, is that we authorize each other every time. For example, you and me right now, we are authorizing each other. and that's a continuous process. And depending on what I say or the questions you ask, we will end up this conversation and say, I shouldn't have asked Ignacio to come here because I didn't like his answers. Or you say, oh, I liked his answers, he fulfilled my expectations, I may ask him twice to come. You see, there's something ongoing, very unconscious, but it's continuous. And once you begin to see it, you can handle that. And when you handle that, the probabilities of failing while trying to validate, bond, or promote change, they increased. So that's why I wrote it. My students actually ask me about it and say, well, where can we read more about this stuff in this perspective? I say, well, that's not much written on this topic, but let me write something. It took me 4 years, but I'm almost there.
That's awesome. I look forward to reading your book. So can you help us now connect the dots between the concepts you have just described as the network of authorization and how it connects to creating the conditions for joy and well-being within a work setting?
Sure. I mean, if you think about it and you accept this idea that we are in a continuous network of real-time authorizations, then you can handle it in a different way. Otherwise, for example, if you are promoted to a new position, the expectations change. People expect more from you. Both people that report to you, your bosses, your peers, they expect more from you. But what they expect is not your technical knowledge. They expect something like more leadership, more capacity to actually manage new possibilities, manage uncertainty, define strategies, handle person and human conflicts, and so on. That's what they expect. People that are promoted are usually promoted because they are technical experts. But then they got into this new position and something different is expected from them. So they begin to feel this anxiety, that this imposter syndrome, and they cannot speak about it because you are supposed to be the right person. So if you had those fears, then maybe we chose the wrong one. So the people begin to have this big anxiety and they don't know where it comes. They don't see that there's this authorization. They don't see it. They feel it, okay, unconsciously. So what do they try to do? They try to show how good they are in managing. And so they go back into the technical. So they go into micromanagement and they begin to focus on providing solutions to the group out from the technical expertise and validate themselves from what they from their knowledge and experience, you see. But people are expecting something different, So if you're not aware of that, you go into a trap. You begin to do more and more of the technical stuff. You go more into micromanagement. You try to validate yourself off of that while the expectations go in a different perspective and you are not aware of that. So the anxiety increases. You do it wrong. People, they get angry at you because you are doing it wrong. And it gets, it's a circle of failing expectations and people, live it with a lot of anxiety, and there's no space for joy if you're living with anxiety. The same if you're promoting change. Why is people not accepting the change? Why do I have people that that don't agree? Why I have this resistance? Why? Because you're not fulfilling the expectations. You don't see the complexity of the system and how the system relates to you. As you don't see it, you just try to push your own way. People react against it and they attacked you. And so you say, I'm a good guy. I'm trying to do good things. Why are people attacking me? So again, no place for joy there. Once you begin to understand this complexity of authorizations, many of the anxieties, attacks that you feel, you just begin not to take it so personally. You begin to separate yourself from the ongoing dynamics, or at least you can see them. And once you see them, it hurts less. I wouldn't say it doesn't hurt. I mean, it hurts less. And you say, well, this is part of it. Okay, people are attacking my role. They are not attacking me personally. I can live with that. Once you can live with that, you will be first more chances to be successful, and second, there's more space to enjoy what you're doing at the end because you are not taking it so emotional and so personal, So I think, and on the other side, that's the third challenge: bonding. Why do I have so much problem to create a good team spirit, or why do I have problems to engage with this department there? If you don't see the network of authorizations, the dynamic authorizations going on there, you probably will be frustrated. Why those guys can work together? Why I'm not managing this correctly? Again, you're just not seeing the needs and the expectations, and then you are doing it wrong, and it fires back to you, and you feel frustrated. And again, with frustration, there's no place for joy either. So I think there's a big relation in seeing those dynamics and be more joyful at work, at the family, with friends, everywhere.
Yes, and everything at the end of the day stems from self-awareness. How can we
absolutely.
become more self-aware in order to really be also more conscious of the impact of our actions or inactions? So
And if you
thank you so
allow me,
much.
I think it's a part of self-awareness, and
Mhm.
and there's also a big part of systemic awareness.
Exactly. Yes.
How am I reacting to this system that is changing because I'm acting upon it. I'm pushing the strategy that generates a systemic reaction, and that systemic reactions generates my own reaction. So how am I self-aware of what's going on in me, considering what's going on in the system I'm in? So just self-awareness in the abstract, it's good, it's necessary, but many times what we need is, why am I reacting to this? Because this is going on around me. So, and that is more complex awareness that we need to get into as well. Not only self but systemic as well. Sorry.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. No, that's wonderful. So, if we talk now about joy and if there would be a recipe for living more joyfully, what would be the three main ingredients in your view?
Well, I would say the first thing. I mean, one thing that humans, we are social beings. So first thing we need to bond with others, and we need to be in a space where we can really enjoy the relations. Sometimes the relations will be tough, there will be problems, but we enjoy the fact that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We humans, we cannot live alone, and we need to bond with others and be aware of, again, of those authorizations going on, and how we can manage that in a positive way for everybody. That's a very important source of joy. It may be in the family, at work, in a community, wherever it is, but we need to engage with others in a nurturing way, and that is something very important. And I think today we are missing that out a little bit, of what we talked before about fear, and I prefer to stay with my pet than engaging with others, or there's this bot that answers what I want to hear. So so I prefer to talk to artificial intelligence instead to a human being. So I think that if we go into that, if we proceed further and further into this isolation, that we will lose one of the biggest sources of joy,
Mm.
which is the relation with others, in my opinion. The second thing, to me, I realized that joy to me comes very much from admiring. When I admire people or art or nature or science or whatever it is, it gives me a lot of joy. It's like I realize there's something that's impressive, that's great. And there's, I think, because it's curiosity, there is openness, there is valuing, and that admiration somehow to me is a source of joy. You are capable of engaging and realizing the awe of an experiment, or of architecture, or the attitude of one person, or the progress of your kids, how this ecosystem is working, or how beautiful the Torres del Paine may be. So every time you admire something, to me that has always been a source of joy, and that requires openness and engaging with others, and curiosity. And you asked me for three. And the three, I would say, the third definitely has to be with a sense of purpose. We need purpose in life. I think Nietzsche said we are the only animal that needs to give meaning to their own lives. And if we fail to provide that meaning to our life, we cannot be happy. And having this sense of purpose that drives you and gives you the courage to confront uncertainty, because purpose gives you a reason to go out of the well-known zone into uncertainty. You need a reason to go into uncertainty and take risks. So that courage comes from a purpose. So if you don't have a purpose, especially in a world changing so fast as the one we're living in today, it's very difficult to generate any kind of progress, any kind of fulfillment, and any kind of joy. So I would say bonding, admiring, and purpose to me could be that some of the ingredients of that recipe, I would say.
Beautiful. And when you're talking about admiring, and I was also thinking about music, and I was curious if you could maybe share with us whether there's a song that you absolutely love to listen to that lifts your spirits and energy whenever you hear it. Would you be willing to share that with us?
Sure, sure. I'm willing to share, but there's no one song. I mean, actually, I've been I'm very eclectic regarding music. I was a heavy metal fan when I was a kid, so I have I had long hair and I went to all those concerts and so on. When I was 13 years old, I went to see Motorhead. So you can imagine pretty hot stuff. Then I changed and I went into world music, very much African music because of my friends, flamenco music from Spain. Then I began to dance salsa. And so I got into Latin music and all that stuff. Today I have a daughter who, he's more into pop stuff and so on. So there's like a big array of kind of different, very different styles in music, some jazz as well, sometimes African jazz, particularly, I love very much. So I would say there's no one song, but depending on the mood I would rather go and back to, listen to AC/DC or going back and I don't know, listen to Salif Keita or Sheikh Lo. I love Sheikh Lo, by the way. It's very, very different. And I say I don't see why people we should constrain to just one source of joy. I think if we are capable of enjoying and admiring and relating to different styles and musical cultures from all the world and perceiving the beauty and the different emotions that they can provoke in us, we will always find one that suits the particular moment that we need. Sometimes you are just nostalgic, for example. Nostalgia is then you have to listen to a fado, Portuguese fado. And there's joy in nostalgia, for example. Sometimes it's not always like smiling and jumping up and down. Sometimes it's just valuing what you have or what you have lost that gives you joy. Recognizing this was important to me, that time I spent with this person, and you listen to that, and it's also joy there. It's not like always smiling and happy faces. There's also joy in different emotions, and different musics provokes those different emotions. Anyway.
Yes. Well said. Well said. Ignacio, any final words of wisdom that you may wish to share with our audience?
Not really. I think we talk about a lot of things. I was just say that maybe the only thing I would say is we're living in uncertain times. We need to learn to live with that and instead of avoiding it, and that requires a resetting of many of our cultural, educational uh, uh, givens to in order to not fall into fear, but rather to find the courage out of purpose to engage with this new reality and make the best out of it and generate progress for us and for the people around us in a way that we can be happy about it and enjoy our life and the life of the people surrounding us. So yeah, something in that line.
All right. Wonderful. Ignacio, it's been an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Andrea. Thank you so much for the interview.